hand.
Let the front benches change over. Right, we come to the statement. Prime Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I will update the House on the situation in Iran and the wider region and our response. Mr. Speaker, the United Kingdom was not involved in the initial strikes on Iran by the US and Israel. That decision was deliberate. We believe that the best way forward for the region and for the world is a negotiated settlement in which Iran agrees to give up any aspirations to develop a nuclear weapon and ceases its destabilising activity across the region. That has been the long-standing position of successive British governments. President Trump has expressed his disagreement with our decision not to get involved in the initial strikes. But it is my duty to judge what is in Britain's national interest. That is what I've done, and I stand by it. But, Mr. Speaker, it is clear that Iran's outrageous response has become a threat to our people, our interests, and our allies, and it cannot be ignored. Iran has lashed out across the region. They've launched hundreds of missiles and thousands of drones at countries which did not attack them, including the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Qatar, Iraq, Bahrain, and Oman. And overnight, Hezbollah, Iran's proxy in Lebanon, launched attacks on Israel, seeking to escalate the war. Mr. Speaker, there are an estimated 300,000 British citizens in the region, residents, families on holiday, and those in transit. Iran has hit airports and hotels where British citizens are staying. It is deeply concerning for the whole House and the whole country. And, Mr. Speaker, our armed forces are also being put at risk by Iran's actions. On Saturday, Iran hit a military base in Bahrain with missiles and drones. There were 300 British personnel on the base, some within a few hundred yards of the strike. Last night, a drone hit RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus. There were no casualties in this strike. Mr. Speaker, it is important for me to say that our bases in Cyprus are not being used by US bombers. The security of our friends and partners in Cyprus is of critical importance. And, Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear. The strike on RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus was not in response to any decision that we have taken. In our assessment, the drone was launched prior to our announcement. Iran's aggression towards Britain and our interests is long-standing, and that's why we've always ensured that protections for British bases and personnel are at their highest level. Mr. Speaker, it is very clear that the death of the Supreme Leader will not stop Iran from launching these strikes. In fact, their approach is becoming even more reckless and more dangerous to civilians. They are working ruthlessly and deliberately through a plan to strike not only military targets, but also economic targets in the region, with no regard for civilian casualties. That is the situation we face today, and to which we must respond. Mr. Speaker, I've been speaking to our Gulf partners over the weekend. They're outraged by Iran's acts, particularly as they played no part in any strikes, and they've asked us to do more to defend them. Moreover, it is my duty, the highest duty of my office, to protect British lives. That is why we put British jets in the air, Typhoons and F-35s, as part of coordinated defensive operations, which have already successfully intercepted Iranian strikes, including, Mr. Speaker, taking out one drone that was heading towards a coalition base in Iraq, housing UK service personnel. I want to pay tribute to our brilliant servicemen and women, putting themselves in harm's way to keep others safe. And I know the whole House will join me in expressing our gratitude and our respect. But, Mr. Speaker, it is simply not possible to shoot down every Iranian missile and every drone after they've been launched. The only way to stop the threat is to destroy the missiles at source, in their storage depots or at the launchers. The US requested permission to use British bases for that specific and limited defensive purpose because they have the capabilities to do so. Yesterday evening, we took the decision to accept that new request in order to prevent Iran firing missiles across the region, killing innocent civilians, putting British lives at risk, and hitting countries that have not been involved. To be clear, the use of British bases is limited to the agreed defensive purposes. We are not joining the US and Israeli offensive strikes. The basis for our decision is the collective self-defence of long-standing friends and allies and protecting British lives. It is in accordance with international law, and we've produced a summary of our legal advice, which clearly sets this out. We will keep the decision under review. Mr. Speaker, we are not joining the strikes, but we will continue our defensive actions in the region. France and Germany are also prepared to enable US action to destroy Iran's capability to fire missiles and drones from source. I've been in close contact with President Macron and Chancellor Merz in recent days, as well as President Trump and leaders across the region to that end. Mr. Speaker, be in no doubt, the regime in Iran is utterly abhorrent. In January, they murdered thousands of their own people, the full horror of which is still hidden from the world. For decades, they have sought to destabilise the region and export terror around the world. Their proxies in Yemen have targeted British ships in the Red Sea. They facilitated Russia's attacks in Ukraine. The regime's tentacles have even reached these shores, posing a direct threat to Iranian dissidents and to the Jewish community. Over the last year alone, Iran has backed more than 20 potentially lethal attacks on UK soil, each of which, Mr. Speaker, we have foiled. So it's clear the Iranian regime must never be allowed to get their hands on nuclear weapons. That remains the primary aim of the United Kingdom and our allies, including the US. And ultimately, this will have to be achieved at the negotiating table. Mr. Speaker, in this dangerous moment, our first thoughts are with our citizens in the region, friends, family members and constituents. I recognise the deep concern that the situation is causing for those involved and for communities across the country. We're asking all British citizens in the region to register their presence so we can provide the best possible support, and to monitor the Home Office travel advice, which is being regularly updated. Across much of the region, airspace remains closed, and local authorities are advising individuals to shelter in place. The situation on the ground may remain challenging for some time, so we're sending rapid deployment teams to the region to support our British nationals on the ground. And we're in close contact with the travel industry and governments in the region, including with our friends in the UAE, given the concentration of British nationals in that country. And we're looking at all options to support our people. We want to ensure that they can return home as swiftly and safely as possible. The FCDO phone lines are open to provide consular support, and ministers are available to meet MPs to discuss any individual cases. Mr. Speaker, we're also reaching out to communities across the United Kingdom, including Muslim and Jewish community organisations, and we're making sure that sites across the country, including places of worship, have appropriate protective security in place. Mr. Speaker, the situation in the region is developing rapidly, so we will continue to update the House in coming days. Mr. Speaker, I've spoken recently about the toll that global events are taking here at home. They come crashing into our lives with ever greater frequency, hitting our economy, driving up prices on the supermarket shelves or at the pump, dividing communities, bringing anxiety and fear. That's why how we operate on the world stage matters so much. Mr. Speaker, we all remember the mistakes of Iraq, and we have learned those lessons. Any UK actions must always have a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. I say again, we were not involved in the initial strikes on Iran, and we will not join offensive action now. But in the face of Iran's barrage of missiles and drones, we will protect our people in the region and support the collective self-defence of our allies, because that is our duty to the British people. It is the best way to eliminate the urgent threat, to prevent the situation spiralling further, and support a return to diplomacy. It is the best way to protect British interests and British lives. That is what this government is doing, and I commend this statement to the House.
Leader of the Opposition, Kemi Bednall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement and for the security briefing I received earlier. This is a defining moment for the people of Iran, the wider Middle East and the world order. I know that hundreds of thousands of British people still in the region, many sheltering from drone attacks, are fearful about making it home. I agree with the Prime Minister that everyone in the region should follow FCDO advice and register their presence with the British Embassy. Can the Prime Minister confirm whether he is making contingency plans for a potential evacuation of UK citizens and what stage the operational planning is at? Let me also, Mr. Speaker, pay tribute to our brave service personnel stationed in British bases in the region. I know that this will be an anxious time for them and their families. They all have our support. Mr. Speaker, we stand in solidarity with our allies, including Bahrain, the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, who, along with others, have been on the receiving end of unprovoked aggression. On Saturday, our allies, the United States and Israel, took targeted action against the Iranian regime, a regime which for decades has been brutally repressing its own citizens, whose leader had the blood of hundreds of thousands of Iranians on his hands and of countless others around the world killed by Iranian proxies. This regime is the world's foremost sponsor of international terrorism. It seeks to annihilate the world's only Jewish state. It has said so repeatedly, and we should take despots at their word. It is a regime whose apparatchiks chant death to Britain. It has attacked British nationals and conducted multiple plots on British soil, as the head of MI5 has warned. It is manufacturing drones en masse for Russia, drones which are raining down on innocent Ukrainians, and it continues to try to develop nuclear weapons in flagrant violation of international agreement, nuclear weapons which, if obtained, would be an existential threat for this country. The outcome of Ayatollah Khamenei's death will, we hope, be a safer Middle East and a safer world, with the future of Iran back in the hands of the Iranian people. But that outcome is not yet guaranteed. On Saturday, our allies in Canada and Australia immediately backed the action taken by America against this despotic regime in Tehran. And I have made it very clear that the Conservative Party also stands behind America taking this necessary action against state-sponsored terror. But over the weekend, statements from the government and the Prime Minister provided no such clarity. It was only last night that the Prime Minister finally told us that the government would allow our allies the use of our own air bases, despite it being obvious that UK interests were under imminent threat. It took Iranian missiles hitting allies in the Gulf before he finally made a decision. And even after that, the Foreign Secretary said this morning that the government has put limits on the actions of our allies operating from our bases. Unbelievably, in his statement today, the Prime Minister still cannot say whether he backs the strikes or not. Today, the President of the United States has taken the extraordinary step of rebuking the Prime Minister publicly, saying he took far too long to grant access. We are told that this dither and delay is because of concerns over international law, but I am afraid that explanation simply does not hold. International law didn't prevent our allies from clearly and unequivocally stating whose side they were on. You don't need international law to say whose side you're on. It has not prevented British governments in the past from supporting strikes which we knew to be right. As the Shadow Attorney General has said, if the doctrines of international law are unable to restrain Iranian terrorism and mass murder, if they tie the hands of democracies while forcing us to stand and watch Iranian atrocities, international law will have failed. It will have become a fundamentally immoral system of law. Why is it that under this Prime Minister, international law always seems to be at odds with our national interest? Why is it that we are giving away? Why is it that we are giving away the Chagos Islands and paying £35 billion for the privilege rather than standing up for our national interest and protecting the crucial military base which even now our allies are using? We in this House are elected to stand up for Britain's national interest, and where the government is doing the right thing, we will always back them. So let me reiterate our offer that if the government brings forward legislation to fast-track banning the IRGC, we will support them. But let me ask the Prime Minister, what national interest was served by refusing to help our allies for so long, particularly when we so need American support to protect Ukraine's and Europe's security? Are we going to see new UK military capabilities deployed to protect our security partners, our bases, including in Cyprus, and British nationals in the region? And will the Prime Minister ensure the Chancellor uses the spring statement tomorrow to set Britain on a clear path to 3% of GDP on defence spending? There is no point wanting action to make the world a safer place, but being too scared to do anything except stand by and watch others. Mr. Speaker, our national interest and national security must be front and centre. The Conservative Party will always work with our allies to make the world a safer place.
Mr. Speaker, she asked about contingency plans for UK nationals, and I can assure her and the House we're working at speed with our partners in the region to take whatever measures we can to make sure that our people can return as safely and as swiftly as possible, and will continue to do so. And I'm happy to update her and the House as we roll out those plans. Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear. There were two distinct and separate decisions over the weekend. The first decision was whether or not the United Kingdom should join the US-Israel offensive against Iran. We took the decision that we should not. We should not.
Absolutely right.
The second decision was a separate decision, and actually a separate request from the US, which was whether we should permit the use of bases for the distinct, specific, defensive purpose of collective self-defence of our allies and to protect British lives, which were put at risk by the actions of Iran on Saturday and Sunday. We took the decision that we should do so. I am clear in my mind that any UK action must always have a lawful basis. It must also always have a viable and thought-through plan. And it must be in our national interests. The Leader of the Opposition, I think, is saying she would have joined the initial strikes whether they were lawful or not. I noticed she didn't say the Shadow Attorney General said they would have been lawful, just that the law should be changed. And I think she said they would have joined the initial strikes without regard to whether they had a plan. She was very critical of us not joining sooner. Therefore, it's impossible to have that position without arguing that we should and we could have joined. I fundamentally disagree. Mr. Speaker, I will tell the House why. Where our military personnel take action, putting their lives at risk, it is our duty, my duty, to ensure they have a lawful basis. On Saturday, we deployed UK pilots into the sky in the region, and they've been working there ever since. They deserve to know that their actions are lawful and there is a viable, thought-through plan. And I will not countenance committing our military personnel to action which doesn't have a lawful basis. That is not a fair thing to do to our serving personnel. And no UK Prime Minister has ever committed our personnel to action unless it's got a proper lawful basis.
In this Select Committee, Dame Emily Thornbury.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Although the attack on Iran by the US and Israel was ill-advised, ill-judged and illegal, it is absolutely no excuse for the Iranians to recklessly bombard its Gulf neighbours. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, is he in a position to give us more details on what we're doing with our Ukrainian friends to support the collective self-defence of Arab nations against the Iranian Shahid drones that are causing so much damage in Ukraine and now in the Gulf?
Can I thank her for that question, because it is an important question. Ukraine, sadly, has more expertise than anyone in dealing with drones, and that's why we're putting their expertise and our expertise together and using it to help our allies in the region as they struggle with drones as we speak.
Sir Ed David, Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I thank the Prime Minister for advance sight of his statement for my security briefing. Once again, President Trump has launched a unilateral and unlawful act. Ayatollah Khamenei was a brutal dictator and a monstrous war criminal. He supported Hamas and their October the 7th atrocities, and he massacred thousands of his own people for daring to protest against decades of repression. I shed no tears for him. But instead I think of all the innocent Iranian civilians who have lost their lives. I think of the US service personnel killed in action, our allies and partners in the region who are being outrageously targeted by Iran, and our British bases which have already faced attack. They did not choose this war. Donald Trump did, and he will bear responsibility for it. We have seen before what happens when an American president launches an illegal war with no idea how or when it is going to end, and we fear for what comes next. So in discussions with the White House, has the Prime Minister demanded to find out what Trump's plan is for what comes next? Does the Prime Minister understand that when he fails to stand up to Trump, especially when he breaks international law, it makes our country less safe? And how will the Prime Minister be sure that defensive operations from UK bases will not become offensive? And in rightly protecting our allies in the region, can we be assured by the Prime Minister that he won't follow Trump's lead down a slippery slope into a protracted conflict. And finally, Mr. Speaker, we rightly expect our brave armed forces to protect British citizens around the world in crises like this. But that includes tax exiles like Isabel Oakeshott and washed-up old footballers who mock ordinary people who stay in the UK and pay our taxes here. So as we protect them, does the Prime Minister agree it is only right for tax exiles to start paying taxes to fund our armed forces just like the rest of us do?
Well, can I thank you for his question and agree that the response of Iran has been outrageous, particularly hitting countries which played no part in the strikes on them. We have had extensive discussions with the United States at all levels, including the military-to-military level, continually over the course of the weekend. We deliberately took the decision not to join the offensive strikes that were carried out by the US and Israel. We did take the decision to take defensive action, firstly ourselves on Saturday with putting pilots in the sky, and secondly by allowing the bases to be used for purely defensive reasons. And we clearly set out the legal basis upon which we took the second of those decisions. And in relation to the limits, they are limited to defence, and that is the base upon which we've agreed the basing. And in relation to his last point, I want to be clear that it is my duty, our duty, to protect all UK nationals in the region, and we will endeavour to do everything we can in order to do so.
Chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tammanji Singh Desai.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Iranian regime, including its late leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, are of course no friends of our country, but I thank the Prime Minister for clarifying that the UK had no involvement in the Israeli and US strikes on Iran. And indeed, my heartfelt condolences to all those who have sadly lost loved ones in the region thus far. And I'm extremely concerned about the safety of the millions of people in the region, including the thousands of Brits who are living there and currently stranded there. So can the Prime Minister please confirm what steps are being taken to ensure their safety, especially from the one-way attack drones? What steps are being taken to help evacuate those Brits who are stranded and want to come back to the UK? And what steps are being taken with our allies to help de-escalate the situation?
In relation to the protection of our citizens, obviously we're still operating and we will continue operating defensively in the air in the region, taking out the missiles and the drones and the strikes, and we have permitted the US basing specifically for the purpose of taking out Iran's ability to launch the strikes in the first place, and the US has the capability to do that in particular. On the question of our citizens and their desire, understandably, to return home as swiftly and safely as possible, we're doing all that we can, working very closely with our partners in the region, and I would ask all those in the region to register their presence so we can give them the best advice as quickly as possible as to how we can keep them safe and bring them home as quickly as possible.
Father of the House, Sir Edward Lee.
Well, whilst many of us believe that we should be guided by the law of national self-interest, not so-called international law, does the Prime Minister agree that we are right to be cautious in this matter, that the British public will warmly support him in defending British people and bases, but they're very sceptical about being dragged into the cesspit of Middle East politics? They remember Iraq, which some of us voted against. They remember all the arguments about weapons of mass destruction. What evidence, actually, is there that Iran was on the cusp of acquiring nuclear weapons? And since when has regime change from the skies ever changed the regime?
Let me thank him for his question. This government does not believe in regime change from the skies, and I thank him for his question. The lessons of history have taught us that it is important when we make decisions like this that we establish there is a lawful basis for what the United Kingdom is doing. That is one of the lessons from Iraq. And that there's a viable, thought-through plan with an objective that can be achieved or has a viable prospect of being achieved. That is the principles that I applied to the decisions that I made over the weekend. They're the principles I applied to the decision not to get involved in the offensive strikes of the US and Israel. They're also the principles I applied separately to the separate decision and a separate request from the US to be able to take defensive action in order to hit the launchers for the missiles that are currently going into allies, countries in the region, and currently threatening our citizens and our service personnel. And I stand by both of those decisions. I repeat, I am not prepared to commit our military service people to action unless I am sure that what they're doing is lawful and has a viable basis. We can discuss what the law is on another occasion, but the law is what it is, and they deserve to know that their Prime Minister cares and pays attention to whether what I'm asking them to do is lawful, and I will always do that.
Diane Abbott, Mother of the House.
The Prime Minister will be aware that very many of our constituents remember the Iraq War, and they will have noted the similarities between this war and the Iraq War, both in the Middle East and both illegal. Of course, this regime, the current regime in Iran, is a horrible regime, violent, murderous, and a threat to international order. But does he accept that our constituents are not prepared to see this country dragged into another war, even in the nature of the Iraq War?
Can I thank her and assure her that we do need and have learnt the lessons of Iraq, which is why I've been so clear there must be a lawful basis and a viable, thought-through plan. In relation to our nationals, I think everybody and all of our constituents would expect our government to take action to protect British nationals. We have 300 British nationals in the region. They are at risk. We've already seen strikes on hotels and airport, hotels where our British nationals have been staying. We've had strikes near military bases within hundreds of yards of our personnel. It's our duty to take the action that we can take and will take to protect them.
Sir Oliver Dowden.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Prime Minister has outlined that the Iranians attacked a United Kingdom sovereign base at Akrotiri, why does that not form the basis for legal military action against the Iranians, not just hosting US forces on our bases, but taking direct action at source against the launch of such missiles, as we did in relation to the Iranian proxies, the Houthis, in previous conflicts that he supported? Moreover, given the Iranians' ability to exercise malign influence on the streets of this country, what reassurances can he give the House and the public at large about coordination across our intelligence and security capabilities to address this heightened threat on our streets?
In relation to the second point, can I tell them there is coordination going on for that very reason? As I set out in my statement, there have been 20 Iranian-backed plots to take action on our streets, all of which have been thwarted, and I pay my respect to our security and intelligence services in the work that they do. In relation to the point he makes, there were two separate decisions made over the weekend. We are in the sky taking action defensively on our allies. Among the reasons we agreed to the request from the US yesterday is because they have the capability to take the missile launchers out in Iran, and that is why we gave them the permission to use our bases in order to reduce the threat to our citizens.
Thank
you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister has spoken about possibly repatriating British citizens in the region. Can he tell us whether this will be through the MOD, and if so, who will foot the bill? Will it be the MOD, the Treasury, or those who are being repatriated?
We're working across all departments in relation to repatriation, and at the moment we're simply focused on working with our allies to get a plan together to get people out in the first place and to do it as quickly, safely as possible. And there's no intention to charge people for that.
Sir Andrew Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Prime Minister's reaction at the end of last week appeared to many to be both anemic and disappointing and at variance with the other Five Eye nations. Yeah. Will he read the analysis of the shadow attorney, the noble and learned KC Lord Wolfson, which shows not only that British active engagement and support is within international law, but that those who seek to use international law to constrain us in these circumstances have the effect of leaving tyrants and murderers in place to continue perpetrating their vile deeds with impunity? Excellent.
Mr. Speaker, we obviously coordinate with our Five Eyes partners. We were dealing with a specific request to take action. And that was important that we applied the principles that actually have been applied by successive governments, which is to ask the question and get legal advice on the question, is there a lawful basis for what is proposed, and does it have a viable, thought-through plan? It's not a legal question, it's about exposing our military personnel to action that risks their lives, making sure that it is lawful before we ask them to do that. I think that is the duty of the Prime Ministers, and previous Prime Ministers have taken exactly the same approach. I will, of course, read the Shadow Attorney's advice, but I'm very clear in the advice that I received, and I will not commit our military personnel to unlawful action. That is not what they would expect and deserve. They are entitled to better than that.
Donald.
As others have mentioned, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Libya, I think many of us know the way this goes. And there are responsibilities on all of our shoulders. And the Prime Minister is right, there needs to be a plan. Has the US President shared with him or consulted with him on what the plan is? Because from our experience we know it's easy for politicians to start the war and fire the weapons. It's when the shooting ends, the nightmare begins.
Yes, exactly.
That's why we need clarity of our role as a country, an independent country, not necessarily swayed even by Donald Trump. And can I say to him, when he stood for the leadership of the Labour Party, he very clearly set out that there would be a vote in this House on any decision about military action. Can I ask him to assure us, so that we don't drift into this war as we have in the past, that there will be a vote in this House?
Can I thank him? And he's right to urge caution. History teaches us that. And that is why it's important not only that there's a lawful basis, but there is a plan that is viable and thought through. And obviously, we've had discussions at all levels with the US in relation to that. In relation to the decision I took yesterday, I'm very clear what the lawful basis is and what the plan in relation to the protection of our nationals is. On the question he raises about a vote, that is, of course, a vote on offensive action, deploying our troops or military, and that is not this situation.
Carmichael.
You will recall that in 2003, this House voted to support George Bush's war in Iraq, and that 10 years later then we voted against supporting Barack Obama's intervention in Syria. I believed and still believe that on both occasions we made the wrong decision, but it was of critical importance for the political and even the social cohesion of this country that these should be decisions made in this chamber. Mr. Speaker, the people of the United Kingdom will not support an intervention that does not have a clear objective and a clear plan for post-conflict period. Will the Prime Minister be guided by these principles, and will he ensure that this House is given its place in whatever is handed to us in the weeks and months to come?
Well, of course, this House must hold accountability and debate on this issue. But just in relation to the vote, there is no convention for a vote in relation to defensive action, only offensive action. and nor could there be, realistically. Defensive action has to be taken at very swift notice. On Saturday morning, I had to take the decision to deploy our pilots to the sky in order to defend our UK nationals. There is no way we could have waited for a debate or vote in the House. Equally, last night I had to take a decision about the deployment and use of bases, and to do that when it was important to do it as a matter of some urgency. But I agree with him, there must be a full debate in the House, but actually the vote in the House is in relation to deployment of military personnel for offensive action, and that is something I have advocated.
Abdusam Mohammed.
Mr. Speaker, I have constituents and family in the region, all terrified about what may come next. The world is infinitely a more dangerous place today than it was last week. Trump and Netanyahu chose to throw away diplomacy and launch a direct attack on Iran, an attack which, as the Prime Minister has said, can never be justified under international law. Equally, Iran's indiscriminate attacks on airports and hotels across the Gulf are also flagrant violations of sovereignty and clear breaches of international law. Does the Prime Minister recognise that this regime change attempt, like so many others before it, will only result in years of instability and conflict in the region? And what assurances can the Prime Minister give that the UK's involvement will remain in defence and will not turn into full-scale military involvement as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya?
Can I thank her for her question and be absolutely clear about the basis upon which the request was acceded to yesterday? It was the collective self-defence of our allies and the protection of British nationals. That remains the case. If it changes, I'll of course make a different decision and inform the House, and therefore she can rest assured that that's the basis of the action that we've taken and will remain the basis of the action that we've taken.
Sir Jeremy Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. British influence in the Middle East is directly linked to the strength of our military and our willingness to use it. When he took office, the Prime Minister rightly increased defence spending, but that sum is now widely thought to be too little and taking too long. So will he unlock the argument between the Treasury and the Ministry of Defence so that this House can always have confidence that we will maintain a military formidable enough to defend our borders, our interests and our values?
Yes, we're working at speed on that, and it's an important point, and it's important that we do so. I would remind the party opposite that they hollowed out our armed forces. It was this government that increased defence spending in the course of this Parliament.
Rogan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Over the weekend, I passed through Dubai Airport, and along with thousands of other people and many of my own constituents, as it turns out, boarded a flight home. Shortly after leaving, we heard the news that this attack had happened. And my immediate thoughts went to the people that were still in the airport, that were then grounded and stuck there, not knowing where to turn or what was going to happen. Now, rather than the blatant aggression and angry sneers that we're seeing from some of the opposition, would the Prime Minister agree that what we need in this situation is calmness and a clear and strategic plan? That is what our constituents want.
Can I thank, and I'm sure that's what our constituents do want. Can I also say how concerned I think we all are across the House at the attacks on hotels and airports in particular. These are hotels that British nationals and others are using, and airports, of course, that civilians are using. This is the extent of the strikes by Iran and the reckless disregard for civilian life that comes with the targets they're working through.
Sir Olney.
The people of Iran have suffered decades of atrocities under the rule of an oppressive regime. However, as we've seen from Iraq and from Libya, the removal of an evil head of state without a future plan for governance can lead to countries becoming failed states. So while I welcome the Prime Minister's reluctance to involve the UK in another protracted war in the Middle East, I remain unclear on the government's vision for the region. I'd like to ask the Prime Minister, does he want regime change? Have his officials contacted the leading opposition figures, such as Reza Pahlavi, to arrange such contingency plans? Or does he wish to negotiate a diplomatic solution with the current regime?
Mr. Speaker, the immediate plan is obviously to take the necessary measures to protect our nationals. And look, I don't think anybody mourns the death of the Supreme Leader. I firmly believe that ultimately the only way forward is a negotiated outcome. Whatever the conflict going on, in the end it will have to end in a negotiated outcome. And that has been the consistent position of both parties for a considerable period of time.
Polly Billington.
We have rightly been focused on defending and protecting British citizens in the region. Can the Prime Minister confirm, though, that he believes that the future of the Iranian government is a matter for the Iranian people and no one else? And can we, as soon as possible, focus our diplomatic efforts on de-escalation and peace, including identifying allies in a coalition of the willing to bring this to an end?
Can I strongly agree with her that the future for Iran is for the Iranian people, and we must absolutely establish that as a founding principle, and that it is our duty to de-escalate in the region and globally. And of course, it's really important that we're acting with our allies, and that's why I was talking to both the Germans and the French over the course of the weekend on a number of occasions.
Thank you,
Mr. Speaker. For those of us who were ready to go into Iraq just over 20 years ago, the comparisons between this and that vote are absolutely zero. The reality is nobody is talking about ground troops, nobody is talking about a land invasion. What we're talking about here is striking those targets that are targeting our friends and allies. Now, in the last few hours, we know of over 500 rockets that have struck the United Arab Emirates, and no doubt many have struck bases around the area. Will he be deploying Dauntless and Duncan out to the Gulf right now? They're both at a state of readiness, and I'm sure the Defence Secretary could give that order this afternoon. And perhaps most importantly, what conversations has his honourable friend, the Foreign Secretary, had with colleagues in the region? Because we talk about solution in conversation with others. But frankly, at the moment, it looks like there will be conversation with nobody, because these events will be happening without us having any part in them.
Thank you for his question. Nobody is making the comparison with Iraq. There is a question of drawing the lessons from Iraq. And the lessons I draw is that there must be a lawful basis for the action that we take, and there must be a viable plan. On the question of the operational matters, I won't go into that across the dispatch box. As for his point about the Foreign Secretary, at all levels, including the Foreign Secretary, we've been talking intensively to our allies over the last few days, intensively. And they've been extremely grateful for what we've done and the way in which we have engaged. I've spoken personally to all the leaders in the region, so I'm not sure what point he's making about us not being involved. They are very grateful for the way that we've involved, and the Foreign Secretary and the Defence Secretary have worked round the clock in the last few days to ensure that all the necessary conversations are had, as he would expect, and I think he probably knows has been happening.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for setting out clearly the reasons why Britain did not join the US and Israel's attacks on Iran? Can I also thank him for ensuring the defence of Britain's Gulf partners and protecting the 300,000 Britons in the region? I agree with him that a negotiated settlement and diplomacy is the best path to peace. Can the Prime Minister outline the role Britain is playing to ensure that the Iranian people are listened to so that they have peace and security ahead, not more war and chaos, not another murderous Iranian regime, and not another US-imposed regime change?
Well, I thank you for a question, and we've been very, very clear in relation to the future of Iran, that it must be for the Iranian people, and that in the end, the question of nuclear weapons will have to be negotiated, and so we will also always ultimately have to get to that point.
Stephen Gaffin.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister will understand why the ghosts of Iraq do hang heavy over this chamber at times like this. And on that basis, does he agree with me that the best tribute to the murderers in Tehran and the Iranian regime is a maintenance of an international rules-based system? And more than that, we owe it to the people across the region to learn from the instability that we had in the aftermath of Iraq. And on that basis, will he tell us what is the long-term viable plan?
Thank you for his question, and we do need to learn the lessons of history, and that's why a rules-based system is important. It's also the rules-based system that allows us to make arrangements to get our citizens home. and to take other matters in conjunction with other countries. And in relation to the plan on the basis of the decision I took last night, that is to take the necessary measures to protect British nationals, and we're clear that in the end there has to be de-escalation and a return to negotiation.
Alex Ballinger.
Mr. Speaker, and can I thank the PM for his restraint in this operation so far and not heeding the calls from the Leader of the Opposition to get us embroiled in the reckless US and Israeli strikes on Iran. I still remember interventions in the region, colleagues not returning from Afghanistan, friends who were shot down and tortured over Iraq, and the massive destruction that we've seen to civilians. So will the Prime Minister commit to limiting UK personnel to defensive operations to protect our citizens and our allies and not get us further embroiled in this unwise and dangerous war?
Yes, I can, and I can absolutely assure him and the House that there will always be a lawful basis for any actions that we take, and there must be a viable plan for it.
Rebecca Smith.
Speaker, over the weekend I heard from families in my constituency whose loved ones, also my constituents, are amongst the 300 service personnel in Bahrain who are within metres of the Iranian missile strike. Now, given we have known about the US force build-up in the region for some time, why did the activity to decommission HMS Lancaster in Bahrain continue? And I trust this is not an operational question. Will the works be paused and service personnel withdrawn until the threat status has been downgraded?
Well, I thank her for her question. In relation to her constituents, can I ask her, if they haven't already done so, to ask them to register their presence as quickly as possible so that we can give them the necessary advice, because this is about how we get people coming out in the coming days. There are obviously wider questions in the region, but it is very important that we take the necessary measures in the coming days.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, and now this illegal war on Iran. The reality is, time and time again, we are dragged into conflicts that are illegal, make the region less stable, and result in devastation and the deaths of hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women and children. Have we not learnt the lessons from the past? So will the Prime Minister make it clear from that dispatch box, firstly, Britain is not Trump's poodle, and never again will we be a launchpad for illegal and endless wars that have no plan and no end, and will he make it clear that any final decision will be made by this House?
Can I thank him for his question and give him and the House my assurance that I will always act in the British national interest? That's the basis of the two decisions I took this weekend.
Monica Harding.
Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister confirm the exact limits of defensive operations and guarantee that these limits won't change? And will the UK withdraw consent to use our base if there are proof that they are being used to carry out offensive missions by the US?
The basis is collective lawful defence in relation to our allies. The purpose is to take out the ability of Iran to carry out the strikes that are currently being carried out across the region and threatening British nationals, and the actions from our bases will of course be monitored, as she would expect.
Samantha.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Firstly, can I associate myself with the comments of the Prime Minister in giving thanks to our brave armed forces who are serving right now? I have constituents in South Derbyshire, and I'm sure we all do across the country, who look at their TV screens and at their social media and see some world leaders who appear reckless, both internationally and domestically, overseeing what looks like state-sponsored murder of people in their own country. So can I thank him for his cool head in this engagement, and can I please implore him to continue exactly as he is, taking all the evidence into account and making decisions that are within the law and putting the interests of our British citizens, both in the countries that are under attack and in the region and at home, first and foremost.
Can I thank her for her question? I've set out the principles on which I've taken the decisions that I've taken this weekend. We keep uppermost in our mind the protection of our citizens and nationals who are in the region. There's 300,000 of them. They are at risk, and it's very important that we do everything we can to keep them safe and secure.
Richard Tice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The truth is this dreadful Iranian regime has been a permanent threat to British interests, British citizens, both domestically and abroad. attacking us, they're spreading their extremist ideology. And surely the Prime Minister understands that actually the United States and Israel has done the West a huge, huge favour in degrading the military capability of this terrible regime. And does he not understand that after 10 years of negotiation that have failed, actually the West was left with no alternative? And does he understand also that actually, in refusing to support the US, he has humiliated us on the international stage?
Can I agree with him that the regime is abhorrent for all the reasons that I've already set out? But I think he's saying that because of that, it is perfectly right for a British Prime Minister to deploy and take action which would not be lawful. I simply and fundamentally disagree. I think it's a very important principle when we're talking about our personnel that we ensure that what we're asking them to do, and they're being asked to put their lives at risk, that we ensure that it is lawful. I believe in that fundamentally. I'm surprised if he doesn't.
In his statement, the Prime Minister mentioned the drone attack on RAF Akrotiri and the UK's support for the security of friends and partners in Cyprus. Can he tell us how the UK is coordinating efforts with the Cyprus government to ensure the safety of the whole island, including the bases?
Can I assure him I spoke to the President of Cyprus yesterday, and I'm hoping to speak to him again later today. Can I repeat what I said earlier, because it's important for reasons that he and the House will understand? The bases in Cyprus are not being used and not going to be used by the US. And it's very important. Why not? Because they're not suitable. But it's very important that that is made clear, because the President and I have been discussing that, as he will understand.
John Whittingdale.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On Saturday, Prime Minister Carney said, "Canada supports the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon and to prevent its regime from threatening international peace and security." Why was our Prime Minister not able to make the same statement? Was Prime Minister Carney wrong?
Look, I'm not trying to pick divisions between our allies on this. I was presented with a different scenario, which is whether we should accede to two requests in relation to action to be taken. That is different, and that requires careful consideration of both the lawful basis and the viable plan. That is the basis on which I took the two decisions that fell to me. Different decisions fall to other Prime Ministers.
Tony Vaughan.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the Prime Minister for his careful response to this issue and his ongoing commitment to the international rule of law. My constituents' parents, Lindsay and Craig Foreman, are currently serving an appalling and unjustified 10-year sentence of imprisonment in Evin prison in Tehran. Other governments have given detailed instructions to their nationals as to what to do if Evin's prison gates were to open and order breaks down. So first of all, will the Prime Minister confirm that a plan covering that situation will be communicated to them to ensure their safety? And secondly, has the government impressed upon the US and Israel the importance of not targeting Evin prison as Israel did last year, given that the lives of 2 British citizens are at stake?
Well, can I thank him for raising this case and assure him that we have been and will continue to take all necessary action to safeguard their interests in relation to this case.
Dr. Ross Sutton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. RAF Fairford is in my constituency of the South Cotswolds. The government has now authorised the US Air Force to use RAF Fairford for defensive operations. Residents have been contacting me today, understandably concerned for their safety, especially given the recent events at RAF Akrotiri. Given that the Prime Minister has pledged to prioritise the safety of UK citizens, what assurance can he offer specifically to the people of Fairford that their safety and security will be fully protected now that UK airbases may be used in operations targeting Iran?
Can I thank her for raising that and assure her and her constituents that all necessary measures are being taken to keep her constituents safe in relation to the use of the base in her constituency. That is a first order priority for us, and that's what we're doing.
Melanie Ward.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Prime Minister is right to be clear that UK military action has to be in line with international law and that we were not involved in Israel and the US's offensive action. He is also right to act to protect British lives and British interests in the face of Iranian attacks. Let me ask the Prime Minister, in rightly drawing lessons from Iraq, does he agree that a failed state in Iran is not in the interests of the UK and not in the interests of the wider Middle East?
I mean, we do have to learn the lessons, and collapsing and failed states have historically proved to be worse, so we do have to be careful.
Sir Julian Lewis.
If a missile battery in Iran was continuing to target British bases, would an airstrike against it be offensive or defensive?
Mr. Speaker, I think I've made clear the base of this. The second decision, we have authorised the US to use our bases in order to take out the ability of Iran to make those strikes. That is legal because it's a collective self-defence.
Sir Zan Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, Iran's reckless attacks have fuelled further regional instability, putting British peoples at risk, along with our allies across the region. The attacks have naturally caused concern about what they mean for our own national security due to the rising oil prices, the cost of living. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that the UK continue to act decisively in our own national interest, including how these conflicts can impact every household in our country?
Can I thank him for that question? We're very concerned about the wider impact, and that's why it's important that we continue to argue for de-escalation and a return ultimately to negotiation.
Dr. Elijah.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My party and I stand with all the brave Iranians who condemn the vile regime in Iran. We also condemn the deeply irresponsible and illegal attack by the US and Israel on Iran, launched in the middle of nuclear negotiations led by Trump, a clearly unstable loose cannon, and Netanyahu, a war criminal. The UK must stand unequivocally against this reckless action. So will the Prime Minister publish the legal advice he received on the initial American and Israeli strikes, not just the more recent advice on the defensive posture? And will he commit to a vote in this House on any UK involvement in this war?
We are not at war, and we are not getting involved in offensive action that the US and Israel are taking. We've published a summary of the legal advice in relation to the decision that we took last night. That is in accordance with practice. It is not practice to publish legal advice or summaries in relation to defensive action.
Liam Bann.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the diffidence that we've heard towards international law this afternoon is as unwise as perhaps it is unsurprising. But just for the sake of clarity for the House this afternoon, can the Prime Minister confirm what would have needed to be true for it to be legal for him to have joined the offensive strikes last week? Because surely that would have required an imminent threat to our national security, which was simply not present when the decision to strike was taken.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I resist setting out the full international law test, but it is clear what the test is. I think that's not disputed, and as far as I know, nobody is challenging the Attorney General's advice that was the summary of which has been published for all to see. I don't think anybody's saying that's the wrong advice. But I will look at the Shadow Attorney General's advice. I will be surprised if he advises that it would have been unequivocally lawful to have joined the initial action. But if the Leader of the Opposition will give me that advice, I will carefully consider it.
Sir Ian Duncan-Smith.
Speaker, may I take the Prime Minister back to his earlier position, where I think his own side does not quite realise what he has said. The Prime Minister said his reason originally for not allowing Fairford, for example, or even Diego Garcia to be used, was that would constitute for him a breach of international law because it would be us condoning an offensive operation. However, he's changed his position on this because of attacks on allies and on a UK base. And that means now that he is authorizing the Americans to act in defense by taking out those kind of missiles that would attack us. Surely that now means that the UK armed forces, in this case the Royal Air Force, could now be used by the government in no breach of international law in a defensive action to take out those missiles as well.
There are two separate considerations, obviously. The first is the decision to whether to join the US and Israel in the first place, and the second was the decision we took last night. We started taking defensive action on Saturday by deploying our pilots to the skies in the region. So we'd already taken that action. We added to that defensive action last night by permitting the US to use our bases to strike at the capability of Iran to issue the strikes in the first place.
David Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been heartening to see the scenes of jubilations from Iranians, from Syrians, and from British Iranians in this country at the death of the evil Ayatollah. They hope it will enable them ultimately to finally gain their freedom from this horrific regime. As the situation evolves, could I ask the Prime Minister to please keep them in his mind's eye and engage and meet with some of the Iranian activists that reside in the UK? And in addition, can I ask that if it does look as if the regime is going to fall, officials can think about the ways in which we can support the Iranian people to rebuild their institutions, their infrastructure, provide aid, just as we are currently doing in Syria.
Can I thank him? We must be absolutely clear that the future of Iran is for the Iranian people who've been brutally repressed for a very, very long time, including the terrible actions that were taken in January of this year.
Richard Ford.
Mr. Speaker, in his statement, the Prime Minister explained his disagreement with the US President about UK participation in the initial strikes, and I commend that decision. When the UK refused to participate in US interventions in Vietnam and Grenada, Harold Wilson and Margaret Thatcher kept their disagreements private, but that's difficult to do with Trump. But crucially, over Vietnam and Grenada, the UK stayed out. Can the Prime Minister assure the House that in the case of Iran, the UK isn't going to get dragged into this war on the basis of collective self-defence in support of allies in the Gulf?
Well, I hope I've set out my position clearly and the reasons behind my decision. That is the basis upon which we made the decision last night. We'll keep it under review, and if it changes, I'll come back to the House.
Yasmin Qureshi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've heard this language before. Military intervention dressed up as necessity or out of humanitarian concern. Libya, Iraq, and the list goes on. All of those led to devastating consequences of people who lived there, hundreds and thousands dead, infrastructures destroyed, countries and regions destabilized, and a creation of a refugee crisis. And I hope that all of those who are chomping for this war will welcome the extra refugees that will be coming onto our shores in light of these particular consequences. Article 51 of the UN does not allow for regime change. And I'm so grateful for our Prime Minister for not going and joining in this illegal war by US and Israel. So can I ask the Prime Minister please to continue with this direction so we don't get involved in another illegal war in the Middle East?
I can assure her in the House I'll apply the same principles of whether there's a lawful basis and a viable case to the decisions that we take.
Shirley Shelbrough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure I welcome the Prime Minister's comments about working with religious communities, trying to ensure safety. But I was appalled, but I'm afraid not shocked, I'm sure the Prime Minister was as well, to see once again the Deputy Leader of the Green Party at the weekend protesting in support of the Ayatollah. And I'm afraid that the Green Party has become a magnet for all of the people that he, quite rightly, kicked out of the Labour Party. And the hatred and the fear that runs through Leeds now, being whipped up at times by Councillor Mothin, is a disgrace, and West Yorkshire Police have begged Leeds City Council at times to have a named person to hire spaces which Leeds City Council run. and they wouldn't do that. And the reason the police wanted that because they can hold somebody responsibly. My Jewish community, Prime Minister, are terrified going into Leeds at the weekend. So may I ask the Prime Minister, will he ensure that he works closely with all policing authorities to ensure that my Jewish community and other communities can be safe?
Well, can I thank him for his question? And I think we're all shocked by the actions of the Deputy Leader of the Green Party, perhaps not surprised given their recent turn of direction. And it is important that all of us set our face against anti-Semitism. And I have to say the argument that the Green Party makes that now is the time to get out of NATO and negotiate with Putin over our nuclear weapons is contrary to the British national interest.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There are direct flights from Newcastle to Dubai and many Geordies in the region, including in the armed forces. So I want to thank the Prime Minister for the steps he is taking to support and protect them, and particularly to acting within international law. Iran is a murderous, despotic state which has frequently threatened and does threaten UK security. But the sight of bombs raining down across the Gulf will not make my constituents feel more secure, especially when the impact on democracy and human rights in the region, and indeed the Iranian regime itself, is, to put it mildly, unclear. So what steps is the Prime Minister taking to bring this conflict, to help bring this conflict to an end and restore some semblance of security in the region?
Can I thank you for raising the concerns of her constituents, and I do understand just how worried they will be, as will all of our constituents who are in the area. That is why it's important that we take measures in the region, as we are doing, to try and take the missiles out of the air, and that is the reason we've given permission to the US to use the basis for the limited and specific purposes that I've set out.
Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Last Friday, the talks in Geneva were apparently making good progress, and there was hope there was going to be some kind of agreement between the United States and Iran. 12 hours later, President Trump ordered attacks on Iran, the first victims of which were a group of school children attending school in the morning. They in no way can be held responsible for anything in Iran, human rights abuses or anything else. In his statement, it's unclear to me under what circumstances US forces will be allowed to use RAF bases. Can they use bases in this country to attack Iran? Can they use RAF Akrotiri for that? And are we, this country, sharing information with the US to further their war aims against Iran? Or could we not instead adopt a stance of trying to bring about an immediate ceasefire in order to prevent further dreadful loss of life across every country in the whole region, and the danger of this escalating into a semi-global conflict?
The uses of the basis for collective self-defence of our allies and to protect British nationals, something I'm sure he would agree with, and specifically to take out the ability of Iran to launch the strikes that are currently going into allied countries and putting our nationals at risk. Can I be clear that we are not using Cyprus for this purpose?
Alex Baker.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and for his leadership. My thoughts are with serving personnel in the region, and also can I mention our armed forces families in Cyprus, some of whom are my constituents. Clear communications from the Ministry of Defence will be crucial in reassuring these families feeling worried and uncertain at this time. In light of the growing threat, can I ask the Prime Minister about the UK's commitment under NATO Article 3 to be prepared? Does he agree with me that we need a total government approach to preparedness, with every minister in every government department clear on their role in meeting our obligations to ensure the UK can face the pressures of this increasingly unstable world?
Well, can I thank her for all she does? I know she has a lot of military families in her constituency, and she's right to be concerned for them, and I'm sure they will be feeling concerned themselves. We will ensure that we're liaising very closely with them wherever they are in the region to ensure that we do all we can to protect them and, of course, thank them for what they're doing. On the wider point she makes, it is important that the whole of government is committed to defence and security of the United Kingdom.
Dr Andrew Murison.
Deputy Speaker, the Prime Minister happily says that he has learnt the lessons of Iraq, a misadventure that his party is responsible for. Would he agree with me that the lesson of Iraq is you do not use lethal force unless there's good evidence that you should do so, and in particular that there is a threat to the interest of this country, which there was not? And would he compare and contrast that with the situation that applies to what has happened over the weekend, when our friends and allies took preemptive action against a feral state that had enriched uranium to 60%, that posed a clear and present danger to ourselves, our interests and our allies?
Well, I thank him for his question, and it is important that we all learn the lessons of Iraq, and there needs to be a lawful basis for action if it's taken, and there needs to be a viable case.
John Grady.
And I refer the House to the Register of Interests and the fact that I'm chair of the Qatar APPG. I thank the Prime Minister for his emphasis on compliance with the law. May I ask the Prime Minister, what discussions has the government held with the government of Qatar and other regional allies about cooperation to ensure the safety, security and support to British nationals, and what joint measures have been agreed to assist British nationals in the region?
Prime Minister.
Can I assure them that I've spoken to all of the leaders across the region in person on the telephone in the course of this weekend, and the Foreign Secretary and Defence Secretary and others have been liaising very, very closely to ensure we can take the best, swiftest and most effective action to protect our nationals.
Mike Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Clearly the Iranian regime is abhorrent and no one would mourn its passing, but as someone who fought in Afghanistan, I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for saying that we need a viable, thought-through plan. Clearly the US doesn't have this plan. President Trump over the weekend said that they were planning on handing Iran over to some people, but then they killed them by mistake. So one of my concerns is the 440 kilograms of 60% enriched uranium in Iran. If the regime is wiped out, the country falls into chaos, what is the plan for the uranium?
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for his question, and he points out the reasons why I've proceeded on the basis there must be a lawful case for what is done and a viable plan. I think the immediate vision import for us is to ensure that we do what we can to protect our citizens and de-escalate the situation so that we can get to a negotiated outcome.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and his reassurance as well about the principles for involving the United Kingdom in any military action. It is so important that we're clear that the rule of law on this side of the House must stand by, as well as having a viable plan. Has my right honourable friend been able to have any discussions with the Arab states and also Turkey in terms of how we might build that plan for de-escalation as quickly as possible?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for a question and assure her that we've been having discussions all weekend with counterparts in the region to that end, which is how do we rise to the challenge that is currently before us, what action can we take to protect our nationals and our allies across the region, and how do we de-escalate?
Lincoln Job.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? And I agreed with parts of it. I agreed when he said that it's an abhorrent regime. I agreed when he said that British civilians, British service personnel and British sovereign bases have been attacked. And I also agreed with him when he said that you can't shoot all the drones out of the air, you have to attack them at source. But his statement very cleverly then implied two things. His statement implied that we didn't have, in international law, every justification for offensive action against Iran, and he also implied that only the Americans had the capability to do these offensive operations. So would he like to just very clearly, bearing in mind the world's listening, state very clearly that he understands that he would be justified on the basis that we've been attacked in launching offensive operations against our attackers, and secondly, that we have the capability to do so?
Prime Minister.
I clearly set out the two decisions that I made over the course of the weekend, including including the decision on Saturday to start taking defensive action with our pilots in the region, and the decision last night to permit the US to use our bases in order to, for collective self-defence, in order to take out the ability of Iran to launch the strikes in the first place.
Andrew Lewin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I put on record my admiration for the skill and the bravery of our armed forces? We owe them a debt of gratitude now more than ever as they see action. The Prime Minister was absolutely right to say we must learn the lessons from Iraq and all the other conflicts where there has not been a viable end plan. Given that, can he reassure me that the decision to allow the United States to launch operations from our bases will be kept under constant review so that the UK's presence in this conflict remains a defensive one?
Prime Minister.
Can I give him that assurance? It will be kept under review, and I'll update the House accordingly.
Afra Brandreth.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It's no surprise that drones have become a central element of Iran's response. The Shahed drones they deploy are relatively inexpensive, easy to mass produce and capable of causing significant damage. However, the interceptors we use to bring them down are substantially more expensive. Given the rate at which Iran is deploying these drones against UK assets and our partners, and the scale at which they can be manufactured, this cost imbalance is a growing concern. What steps is the Ministry of Defence taking to develop effective but more cost-efficient countermeasures to address these challenges? And will he now look again at bringing forward the timescale for increasing our defence spending?
Prime Minister.
She raised an important point, and obviously we're working at pace in order to deal with the drones, and also working with our Ukrainian colleagues who've been facing this for 4 years, and we've been working with them on that. And that's why we are working with them to protect or help to protect allies who are under attack in the region.
Naz Shah.
Overnight, my constituents have lost the benefit only promised to them last week of savings on energy prices with the attacks on refineries across Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Oil prices have surged, and gas prices to Europe have surged by 52% upwards just in the last few hours. The longer this carries on, it risks escalation, and across the Middle East and closer to home, this impacts on the day-to-day lives of the British people through increased energy costs. Can I ask the Prime Minister, firstly, what assessment has the government made on the risk of energy prices to a British household, and what efforts he's making to make sure we can de-escalate sooner rather than later?
Minister.
Well, she's right to highlight the impact on the day-to-day lives of our constituents, and we're carefully monitoring that, as you would expect, and we're doing all that we can with our allies to de-escalate the situation.
Ian Room.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As a veteran myself, I agree with the Prime Minister that the safety of our armed forces and British citizens should come first with any decision made in the future. Given a rapidly evolving situation, with will the Ministry of Defence now expedite the promised defence investment plan so our industry can get on and make the capabilities that this country needs?
Prime Minister.
Yes, we're getting on with that as quickly as we can.
Barry Gardner.
We should all welcome the end of the Iranian regime if it is the end of the regime. Those of us who were in this House for the decision on Iraq needed no convincing then that Saddam's was an evil regime. We needed convincing that the attack was permissible in international law and that there was clarity about the exit strategy. It had neither. The US attack on Iran has neither. But the Prime Minister's broadcast justification of the use of our bases spoke of enabling a defensive strike. Words have meaning. A defensive strike is a contradiction in terms. The usual phrase is a preemptive strike, and in any language, a preemptive strike is an attack.
Minister.
Well, the use of the bases is to allow the US to use its ability to take out the ability of Iran to launch the attacks in the first place. I think that's relatively clear.
David Mundell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Houthis in Yemen have declared their support
for Iran, but so far have taken no preemptive action. Given that the UK has previously been willing to take action against the Houthis, if they do become involved, would we be willing to do so again?
Prime Minister.
Well, I won't get into hypotheticals, but I will reassure him that both when the last government was in and we were in opposition, we supported that action, as was the case when we were in government and they were in opposition. So he can see what the consistent practice is there.
Richard Baker.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The brutality of the Iranian regime is unquestionable, but does the Prime Minister agree with many of our constituents still in the region? Many people will be deeply concerned at the indication from the United States today that it will increase its airstrikes on Iran. Can he assure us he will redouble his efforts to take forward the strategy he has rightly set out today of de-escalation and action which is in accordance with international law?
Prime Minister.
Well, can I acknowledge the concern of his constituents, as many of our constituents will be concerned. That is why it's our duty to take measures to protect them first and foremost and to de-escalate the situation.
Andrew Rossendale.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister, I hope, agrees that current events show how vital military infrastructure is in the Middle Eastern region of the world. Yet, at the very moment when Diego Garcia is relied upon as a critical asset, the Prime Minister proposes to transfer sovereignty to Mauritius and lease the airbase back for our use. So, does he not realise what a catastrophic policy this is? And will he abandon this misguided plan and ensure that those islands remain under British sovereignty?
Prime Minister.
The deal secures the islands so that they can be used for the important purposes that they are used for. It's vital that we got the deal, otherwise we'd not be able to carry out the operations in the same way.
Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This conflict has already cost lives, with civilians caught in the crossfire and hundreds of thousands of UK nationals stranded in the region. If it continues for the weeks ahead, it is only going to make it more difficult to evacuate our nationals. It will cause a humanitarian catastrophe and damage to the world economy. Can the Prime Minister say more about what he will do in the coming days to work with our EU allies and allies in the Middle East to try and bring an end to this conflict and return to diplomatic negotiations to secure peace and security and the protection of civilian lives?
Prime Minister.
Can I reassure her that we're talking to our allies in the region and to allies in Europe and France and Germany in particular over the course of the weekend to be clear about the principles we're applying and to ensure that we're doing everything we can to de-escalate the situation.
Jerome Mayhew.
Seeking some clarity from the Prime Minister. Given his initial refusal of permission for the use of bases by the US, is it the view of His Majesty's government that the initial strikes by Israel and the United States were illegal?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the question I was asked and I was answering was what would be the lawful basis for anything the United Kingdom would do. That is the question. That is the question I considered over the weekend, and that's what guided me in the two decisions I had to make about the United Kingdom.
James Nation.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Prime Minister, I had 40 constituents with me this morning, and they were very concerned about the creation of a regional vacuum, specifically in places like Lebanon and Yemen. I wondered if the Prime Minister could confirm what steps the UK is taking to prepare targeted stabilisation and humanitarian efforts in countries that are most exposed should the Iranian regime change.
Prime Minister.
Well, I thank him for that, and it's very important that we take those measures in the countries that are most exposed, and we're talking to our allies about how we can do that.
Tim Farron.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I had the opportunity to visit the West Bank in Israel a couple of weeks ago, where these actions were being anticipated and largely with some dread. The great sense I got from talking to both groups of people was this sense of deep national trauma, and in no small part caused by the action of Iranian-backed terrorists. But what does the Prime Minister know about the ultimate intentions of either the Israeli or American governments here? What is their exit strategy? What are their objectives? There can be no probability of a regime change that comes from all this. So how does this make the lives of the Iranian people any better and the lives of the wider Middle East any more secure?
Can I thank him for raising the West Bank, which is a cause of great concern, only intensified by the actions of recent days, and I'm not surprised that it's caused deep concern in the West Bank, and tell him that as far as the UK is concerned, I've clearly set out what our strategy is and the basis for the actions that we are taking.
Bill Esterson.
Deputy Speaker, the Energy Security Select Committee has heard multiple sets of evidence about the risk of our dependence on fossil fuels because of the volatility of prices. The way the oil and gas prices have gone up has been a salutary reminder of exactly that evidence. And remember, gas sets the price for our electricity most of the time as well. So isn't it the case that the energy transition is not a matter of ideology? It is a matter of both national security importance and economic importance.
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for his question? And among the reasons for pushing ahead with renewables is because it gives us energy security and independence, which is hugely important at a time like this.
Can I please urge members to make their questions significantly shorter? There are still a huge number seeking to catch my eye. I know we're going to have an exemplary performance from Mark Pritchard with a very short question, please.
Yeah. Well, when British children are being bombed in Dubai and when the British military are being attacked in Cyprus, Qatar, in Bahrain, can I ask the Prime Minister why it is that it seems like, and I hope you'll forgive me, he's frozen with indecision, entangled in his own legalese and fretting about his own backbenchers, looking to the left in his own party as much as looking to the Middle East. He will know at that dispatch box that I've supported him time and time again on foreign policy decisions. But I have to say to him today, it is not his finest hour, that he's looking very weak, and that is not in our national interest.
Prime Minister.
I have been absolutely focused only on British nationals this weekend. That has been the total focus of my attention, and it's a disservice to him to suggest otherwise, really.
Absana Begum.
Madam Deputy Speaker, a constituent who fled Iran fought through tears as she told me how she worked. She wanted an end to the regime in Iran that had targeted her and her loved ones, and also said that she wanted absolutely no illegal military intervention from external forces. Does the Prime Minister understand that by enabling the use of military bases in the government's allies, in this case the US and Israel's illegal actions, that it is dragging our country into a wider conflict of which it does not have the power over the outcome, and that risks making all of us more, not less, safe?
Prime Minister.
No, our decisions were made to protect British citizens and British nationals, and I stand by that decision.
Edward Morello.
Madam Deputy Speaker, the Iranian regime is a murderous regime. It is an exporter of terrorism. It is a threat to regional and national security. Its removal is good for British security. It is good for the Iranian people. But what comes next is even more important than what has happened. The Prime Minister has repeatedly said he wants a viable, thought-through plan. Does he think that President Trump has a viable, thought-through plan for what comes next?
Prime Minister.
Well, Madam Deputy Speaker, we're obviously discussing all matters with the US all of the time. I'm absolutely clear what our plan is and what the basis for our decisions are, and I've set them out to the House.
Luke Meyer.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Our primary duty at this time must be the safety of British nationals in the region. People like my constituents, the Foreman family, who are currently trapped abroad and not knowing when they will be able to come home. Their father's medication is running out today, and they have no idea whether they will be able to obtain those drugs. So what assurance will the Prime Minister provide that consular support will be put in for families like my constituents to make sure they can get the medication that they need and ideally come home as soon as possible?
Prime Minister.
Can I assure him that we're taking every step we can to ensure they have the support that they need, including steps over the course of this weekend?
Greg Stafford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I associate myself with the comments from the Prime Minister about our service personnel in Bahrain and in Akrotiri, which I had the pleasure of visiting in the summer. It's difficult to know where to start with the confusion and cognitive dissonance that is shown in the Prime Minister's statement, not least of which where he is against attacking Iran because it has nuclear weapons, but is willing to attack it because it has conventional weapons. Now, on the conventional weapons point, British sovereign territory in Akrotiri has been attacked, yet the Prime Minister is unwilling to use British personnel, the RAF, to strike on Iran. What would it take for Iran or any other state actor to do to this country for him to act?
Prime Minister.
We're using British personnel to defend Cyprus at the very moment.
Josh Fenton-Glynn.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. No one should shed a tear for the Iranian leadership. They're a brutal and oppressive regime, but there are other brutal and oppressive regimes in the world, and that in and of itself is never a reason to attack a country. So can the Prime Minister please assure me that any involvement of British troops or assets in this conflict will be purely defensive?
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I've set out the principles on which I will act. I thank him for his question. Any action will have to have a lawful basis and a viable case.
30 seconds. David Chadwick.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. As long as the Iranian regime exists, it will continue to pose a direct threat to our security and to stability across the region. Yet Cabinet Office figures show that non-ODA integrated security fund spending for the Middle East is set to fall by a third in the coming years. Can the Prime Minister explain why funding to counter Iranian threats is being reduced at precisely the moment that those threats remain so acute?
Minister.
We're taking a number of measures to deal with Iranian threats, as he would expect.
Kim Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister claims that lessons have been learned from Iraq. I really hope that is true. Netanyahu and Trump instigated an illegal act of aggression, putting thousands of people's lives at risk, including UK nationals and the military. So does the Prime Minister agree with me that diplomacy and de-escalation is needed and for not bringing Britain into a reckless and catastrophic war? And can you provide some details about this viable, thought-through plan in terms of repatriating our nationals?
Prime Minister.
Can I assure her I'll continue to apply the principles I've set out and work to de-escalate across the region?
Craig Smith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Iranian regime ignored the JCPOA, which completely failed. The Iranian regime's terror activities have reached these shores. And while we meet here this afternoon, the Iranian regime's rockets rain down on our allies across the Middle East, including Hezbollah's rockets into Israel. So can the Prime Minister set out clearly what evidence underpins his view that this Iranian regime is in any way, shape or form interested in coming to the negotiating table?
Prime Minister.
My point is simply that in the end and ultimately there will have to be a negotiated outcome when it comes to nuclear weapons. But at what point that happens is obviously unclear, particularly after the last few days. But that is why it's been the consistent policy of both our parties for years that this should be a negotiated outcome. It was his party's policy until Friday of last week.
Rupa Huck.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Door knocking in Ealing yesterday, a student whose parents fled Iran in 1979 told me how overjoyed they are to get rid of this despotic, tyrannical regime. Yet the methods, a girls' school was hit, 150 kids, after we appear to have normalised the bombing of schools, hospitals, refugee camps, universities by one of the two instigators of this action in Gaza, surely risk undermining the rules-based order. What does the PM see as the end game of this war, and how will he stop Operation Fury turning into Operation Futility?
Prime Minister.
Well, I've clearly set out the basis for the decisions that I've taken and my view that we should all do all we can to de-escalate the situation.
Shawkat Adam.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd like to thank the Prime Minister for his measured statement and restraint.
However, with Israel's and USA's illegal action over the weekend, taking out admittedly a very repressive and brutal regime leader, has left the region and the world in turmoil. And this is creating real fear, Prime Minister, especially for our children. In fact, my 14-year-old asked me over the weekend, Dad, are we all going to be okay? So as a father himself, can I ask what assurance he can give to my son, to all the children in this country and in the Middle East, that he will do everything in his power to prevent the outbreak of potentially World War III, which Donald Trump and Netanyahu are driving us towards?
Prime Minister.
The protection and security of British nationals is my foremost duty, and I take it very seriously. That's why I took the decisions that I did over the weekend and will continue to do so.
Andrew Pakes.
Madam Deputy Speaker, like many people in my constituency, I said prayers over the weekend watching the events unfold. It's clear the region's in a perilous state and we need a de-escalation, to follow the rule of law and get peace back on the table. But can I ask the Prime Minister about a related question in the region? He will know that many in this House were passionate about ensuring a ceasefire in Gaza and ensuring aid and humanity got in. We know over the weekend that there has been a closure in the West Bank and Gaza. So can I ask the Prime Minister what reassurance he can give us that whilst we look towards Iran, we don't lose sight of the humanitarian need we have in Gaza and the West Bank?
Can I thank him for raising this? And the ceasefire in Gaza is welcome but fragile, and not enough aid was getting in even under the circumstances before this weekend, and we were working with others to ensure that we can alleviate the situation as quickly as possible.
Sarah Ball.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Even if our military personnel are not fully offensive space, the additional air policing that the RAF are being committed to across the Middle East means that they're now having to do double the work with no extra resources. So can I ask the Prime Minister what additional resources are they giving to the RAF now to protect our service personnel in this
Prime Minister.
This is the government that's increased defence spending, and I can assure her that our service personnel are working very hard as we speak to keep us safe and to protect the region, and we thank them for doing that.
Clive Efford.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I commend my right honourable friend for his resolute stand? It can't have been easy to stand up to the President and not get dragged into this war that has no apparent end plan. We made that mistake in 2003 and the result was disastrous. Now, the President of the United States has made it clear that he wants to see regime change. Can my right honourable friend say, has he seen any evidence of any plan to achieve that coming in the negotiations that we've had with the United States?
Prime Minister.
I can assure him we're talking to the US at all levels, and there's real clarity about the action that we've taken and the basis for the action we've taken and the reason for the action.
Liz Saville-Roberts.
No one here is an apologist for the cruel Iranian regime, but the escalation initiated by the US administration and the Israeli government is illegal, and I'm certain that the Prime Minister knows this. There are hundreds of thousands of UK citizens directly affected and at risk. They include people from Dwyfo Meirionnydd. And while there must be questions anon about a vote in this House when we fear that these defensive actions will slide into offensive ones, and we do not know how we will track that process, nonetheless, the question for today that people want us to ask is when will people be coming home, especially from Doha and Dubai?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for her question? I know that her constituents and all of our constituents will be very concerned, particularly since there's 300,000 in the region. That is why we're working with our allies to make sure that the answer to her question is that we'll get them home as quickly and as safely as we can, obviously working with our regional allies on this as we speak.
David Burton-Sampson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the PM for his measured response so far. I've spoken to former constituents and friends who are in the UAE and who are British expats. While they feel confident that the local government there are doing all they can to protect them, for clarity, will they too be considered for evacuation by the FCDO should it become necessary?
Prime Minister.
Well, we're working with all of our allies to make sure that we can ensure that all those who need our help get our help and safely and swiftly removed from a region that is dangerous for them.
David Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think we can all agree that international law has an important role to play.
But the world is changing, and we must adapt to protect our national security. Now, given that international law is broad in nature and open to interpretation, and we've heard that from the differing views of both the Attorney General and the Shadow Attorney General, for public accountability and the seriousness of this situation, can the Prime Minister tell us how many and which international lawyers he consulted before he made his decisions over recent days?
Prime Minister.
I'm not going to disclose the full advice, but I would. It's not just. It's not just as an important role. It's vital if we're taking action that involves our personnel. It's vital. That's why I took advice. I've published the summary of that advice. I said I'll look at the Shadow Attorney General's advice. If he's setting out a lawful basis, I'll be very interested to read it.
Laura Kirksmith.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for his statement and for his clarity on our adherence to international law. History shows us that military interventions from Somalia to Afghanistan, Iraq and Libya do not always lead to peaceful political transitions and often have wider regional and global repercussions. So can the Prime Minister reassure me that his focus will be on encouraging a peaceful transition for the people of Iran and de-escalating the situation regionally and globally?
Prime Minister.
Can I give that reassurance and also underscore her point that the future of Iran must be for the people of Iran who've been brutally repressed for a very long time now?
Jess Brown-Fuller.
Madam Deputy Speaker, we must not conflate the appalling actions of Iran with that of the Iranian people, who have spent years fighting at great risk for change and intensively over the last couple of months. The severe case of repression under the Ayatollah has led many of them to actually welcome the actions of Trump and Netanyahu. But how is this government going to ensure that Iranian voices are heard when decisions are being made about their future once military action finally subsides?
Can I thank her for a question? It's very important that we're clear on the principle that the future of Iran must be for the Iranian people who have been brutally repressed, and particularly in recent months, but not only in recent months, and we must consistently make that case, and we are doing so.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an extremely dangerous moment. Iraq, Afghanistan and Libya show where this can end up, with death, destruction, terror and chaos impacting tens of millions of people. Given that, shouldn't the government's focus be on pushing Trump, Israel and Iran towards diplomacy, de-escalation and a ceasefire, and instead, by siding with Trump, hasn't the Prime Minister risked dragging us into a wider conflict which leaves us all less safe and which could include mission creep, which will erode the distinction the Prime Minister is attempting to make between offensive and defensive actions, leading us embroiled fully in an illegal US war in the Middle East?
Prime Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, my focus has been on the protection of British nationals in the region. There are 300,000 of them. They are at risk, and it is our duty to take steps to ensure that we reduce that risk and bring them to safety and security.
Simon Hall.
Mr. Speaker, a militarily degraded Iran would be welcomed by both the region and the world. But an Iran that still possesses enriched uranium and potentially becoming a failed state is something to be avoided at all costs. The Prime Minister will recognise that. Whilst it's uncertain what President Trump's plan is, there will be clearly, at some point, negotiations, talks towards peace and a cessation of action. Will he impress upon the American administration that now is the opportunity to link progress for ordinary Iranians, their democratic rights, their freedoms and their civil liberties as part of that, and not just view it as a military degradation exercise?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for his question and agree with the way he puts it? It is very important that we deal and acknowledge the brutal repression of Iranian people for so many years.
Jim Dixon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I express my support for the government's handling of the events this weekend, particularly the clarity given by the Prime Minister today that international law is paramount, and also the priority given to the safety of UK citizens. Does he agree with me, however, that this will only end when Iran and the US and allies get round the table, talk about nuclear de-escalation, and Iran abandons its nuclear ambitions? Will the Prime Minister perhaps tell us what conversations he'd had with allies in order to ensure that that happens?
Prime Minister.
Well, we're having conversations with allies about de-escalating the situation and how we get back to negotiation, which in the end, at whatever stage it is going to have to be part of the process.
Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And we should welcome the actions of America and Israel in trying to destroy a regime which the Prime Minister has described has exported terror all over the world. But why the weak-kneed response from the government that we're limiting our bases to defensive actions? And maybe he would clarify, what does he mean by defensive actions? For example, attacks on the drone factories which are used to deliver the bombs, is that defensive? Attacks on the leaders who are planning the war against our allies in the Middle East, is that defensive? Attacks on nuclear facilities, would that be regarded defensive? Or attacks on the infrastructure which is used to mobilise these weapons, would that be defensive? What are the limits of this defensive action?
Can I be absolutely clear with him that the action which we've authorised from our bases is to take action to take out the capability of Iran to launch these attacks, and that of course means taking out their capability, the launchers and the infrastructure that sits behind it. Of course it does.
Amanda Martin.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and thank the Prime Minister for his calm and measured approach and reassurance today. As the Member of Parliament for Portsmouth North and the mum of a serving personnel currently deployed overseas, my first thought is always for the men and women we ask to stand in harm's way. The Iranian regime recklessly attacks are not abstract. They are direct threats to British service personnel and British citizens in the region. Will the Prime Minister firstly confirm that every measure is being taken to protect constituents on the ground? And secondly, when we pursue de-escalation democracy, will he assure the House that operational decisions are grounded firmly in one overriding principle, the safety of our British servicemen?
Well, can I thank her? I know a number of her constituents are deployed abroad, and we are doing everything we can to protect them and to thank them for the work that they're doing in the region.
Ben Spencer.
Speaker, I've heard a lot of legal analysis from the Prime Minister, but nothing on what he thinks is morally right. Isn't the biggest risk to international law when leaders hide behind legal advice to avoid taking responsibility for their decisions?
To ask our service people to act when we don't have a lawful basis will be a dereliction of moral purpose, in my view.
Rebecca Long-Bailey.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. There is no doubt that the Iranian regime is abominable, but it's clear that the initial joint strikes on Iran were neither defensive nor lawful, and now as the situation dangerously escalates, hundreds of innocent civilians are now dead across the Middle East, and UK personnel and citizens are at risk. So I know the Prime Minister's outlined that his aim is a negotiated settlement. Can he outline the tangible action he and his international counterparts are taking now to secure a ceasefire so that negotiations can resume?
Can I thank her for her question and reassure her that the actions we're taking are to protect British nationals and we're working with others to de-escalate in relation to the situation.
Dr Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since coming to the Chamber today, a senior Iranian commander has said that they would seek to bomb Cyprus to force out US aircraft from our sovereign bases. So as a guarantor of Cyprus's security and as a sovereign presence on the island of Cyprus, can I ask the Prime Minister what concrete military devices do we have and measures do we have in place in Cyprus to ensure that no further successful drone attacks can happen on the airfield, but also what assurances can he offer to Cyprus as a whole that no attacks will take place in Cyprus as a result of our presence there?
Can I be absolutely clear again, because it really matters, that we are not using Cyprus for US bases. That is our base. And I won't go into operational details, but as he would expect, we're taking all the necessary measures to ensure that Cyprus and the base are safe. I spoke to the President yesterday. I hope to speak to him again later this afternoon.
Frank McNally.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. Given the comments from the Iranian Foreign Minister yesterday that the IRGC is adopting a decentralised mosaic defence to fragment command and control structures and create even more unpredictable flashpoints, can my right honourable friend update the House on what steps he is taking with allies, including partners in the region, to mitigate such developments which threaten to escalate and prolong this conflict?
Minister.
Yes, I can. We've put in extensive sanctions already, and we keep the situation under constant review.
Ben Obsi-Jekti.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'd just like to come back to the drone attack on RAF Akrotiri and the alarming ease with which the Iranian regime was able to penetrate our defences and strike the airfield there. It very much suggests that there is very little in the way of counter-UAS capability there, and also suggests that there's nothing in the way of two counter-UAS wing there in terms of squadrons to deter that. But can the Prime Minister confirm what type of drone it was that struck the airfield? And can he also confirm what the origin of that drone was? Did it fly from Iran, fly all the way across Israeli airspace to strike Cyprus, or did it come from Hezbollah in Lebanon? And if so, given that we've been attacking Daesh targets via Operation Shader this year, will he strike back at Hezbollah if it proves that the drone came from there?
Prime Minister.
Can I just reassure him and through him everybody in Cyprus, there are protective measures in place, and his description is not right, and it's not helpful to those living in Cyprus to cast it in those terms. It really isn't. As he would expect, there are extensive measures in place, both US measures and UK measures in relation to the defence of Cyprus and the airbase there, and it's very important I make that absolutely cleir.
Bel Ribeiro-Adi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the Foreign Office's preparation for a potential evacuation of Britons currently in the Middle East and the Prime Minister's commitment to their safety. There will, however, be a number of British residents who may have gone for work or leisure, and I've not heard them mentioned specifically today. They live their whole lives here and have their families here, like many of the 12,000 non-UK citizens from the Commonwealth who currently serve in our armed forces. Given the quite negative rhetoric surrounding those with indefinite leave to remain at the moment, people are concerned. So will the Prime Minister confirm that all UK residents, not just citizens, will be included in any evacuation, because they are our people too?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for that reminder? I did mention it in my opening statement, but she's quite right that we must be clear that we will protect all of those who need our protection, and obviously where people need to get out, we're working with all of them to get them out as quickly and as safely as possible.
Helen Maguire.
After the fall of the regime in Iraq, there was no long-term plan and civil society collapsed. In 2004, I was an Optelic 4 in Iraq, retraining the Iraqi police service. One day I asked my Lance Corporal, how do we know if the recruits are former Ba'athist regime supporters or not? And he said, we don't. We've no idea who we're training. The US attacked Iran with no clear strategy, and now this government has agreed that UK bases can be used for defensive attacks. I'm seriously concerned about the potential for mission creep when there's no clear understanding of Trump's military objectives. In deciding to allow the US to use UK bases for defensive actions, UK military and civilian lives have been put at risk. Military operations with no clear objectives tend to fail. So can the Prime Minister explain how such a decision was made which could lead to mission creep when we have no understanding of Trump's long-term military aim or post-conflict plan?
Can I thank her for a question? The decision was taken to allow the bases to be used to protect our nationals. It is worth considering the alternative, which is to recognise the risk to our nationals, have the opportunity to do something about it, and take the decision not to. That would be a dereliction of duty, in my view.
Can I respectfully suggest to colleagues, by the time they get onto page 2 of their question, it is too long? Mark Sewards.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Iranian regime kills its own people. It funds terrorist proxies in Hamas and Hezbollah. It backs Putin's aggressive war in Ukraine, and now it puts British civilians and our armed forces in the firing line. By some accounts, it is already a failed state. I absolutely back the Prime Minister's decision to allow UK military bases to be used by the US for defensive strikes, given the attacks on our bases in the Gulf and Cyprus. But does he agree, given the threat Iran poses on our streets here, the absolute minimum we should do is prescribe the IRGC, along with any other organisations that threaten British civilians?
Well, can I assure him we keep that under review, and we have already put in place a considerable number of sanctions.
Dr Neil Shastrihurst.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Prime Minister set out in a statement with some clarity the threats posed by Iran. Taking that into account, does he not recognise that treating international law as a rigid instrument as opposed to a flexible one, as he appears to do so, risks binding our hands when it comes to national security?
Prime Minister.
I've made the point a number of times. It's important there's a clear legal basis. I'm not actually sure what the position of the party opposite is. Are they saying they would have joined the original strikes irrespective of whether it was lawful or not. I haven't heard a clear answer to that. It would be very helpful to have one.
Graham Downey.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. Iranian action in the Strait of Hormuz, as well as the attacks on energy infrastructure, is driving up energy prices, or risks driving up energy prices here in the UK as well. Will the Prime Minister make sure that in the coming days and weeks he makes clear where the blame for any rising energy prices lies, and that is with Iran? And will he make sure he's holding any discussions possible to support people in this country, including in my constituency, with any rising bills that are affected?
Prime Minister.
Yes, can I give him that assurance? It will be of concern for his constituents and so many of our constituents, and we'll take every measure to protect them.
Saoirse Eastwood.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. People in Northern Ireland are entitled to be British, Irish or both, and as such, many have travelled to the Middle East on an Irish passport. We know the FCDO have asked people helpfully to register. However, those Northern Irish citizens that have an Irish passport that are also UK nationals cannot register. Will the Prime Minister assure me that he will work to make sure that my constituents in Lagan Valley and across Northern Ireland will not be left behind?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank her for raising that, and I'll get to the bottom of it and make sure that the concern she's raised is properly, fully and swiftly addressed.
Jeevan Sander.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I thank the Prime Minister for raising the spectre of Iraq. We remember on this side in this House how a bloody invasion can lead to brutal civil wars. We know the aftershocks of now will last years and not days. And we're also seeing, of course, energy prices spike, oil up by 10%, gas up by over 50%. So can the Prime Minister assure me that he will act to restore peace in the region, as well as make life and keep life affordable for our citizens?
Prime Minister.
Yes, I can give him that assurance. It's very importantly raised it. I thank him for doing so.
Dr Luke Evans.
The Prime Minister has been explicit on two decisions. One to say no bases were used, now some bases can be used. Could he set out specifically how this interacts with the Diego Garcia bill and the exchange of notes from 1966 between the UK and the US?
Prime Minister.
It doesn't. It's the simple use of bases operationally, which has been agreed as of last night.
Chris Vince.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I join the Prime Minister in paying tribute to our brave service and personnel who every day work incredibly hard to keep us safe, and also his particular leadership on this matter. I have a number of constituents from my constituency of Harlow who are currently trapped in Bahrain and Dubai, one of which is pregnant. What advice can the Prime Minister give to them who are worried about their safety?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for raising the case of his constituents? I'm sure they're very anxious about the situation, and assure them and him that we're working at pace with our allies to get a safe and swift route for them to come out of the region, which is what they all want.
Vicky Slade.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to go back to the original attacks. Last year, Trump told us that he was attacking Iran to destroy any possibility of them getting a weapon, and he told us afterwards that he had obliterated the threat for years to come. Given that that was the justification for the attacks last week, and now Israel have said that it had been planned for months, it seems questionable, the urgency of the attack. So what can the Prime Minister tell us about determining the facts around the justification for this and the presence of nuclear materials, so the basis of any future action is clear?
Prime Minister.
I thank her for a question. And, as I said, I took two decisions over the weekend. The second was allow the bases to be used because of the actions of Iran and the need to protect our citizens, our nationals.
Martin Vickers.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Father of the House is no longer in his place, but can I put on record my support for the words of caution that he expressed earlier? And can I turn the Prime Minister's attention to oil supplies? It's not just the risks to shipping, but also I understand from contacts in the industry that some refineries in the region are shutting down. Clearly that could have a serious impact on business in this country. Could the Prime Minister assure us that contingency arrangements are in hand to maximise oil supplies?
Prime Minister.
Can I thank him for raising that issue and assure him that we are taking measures with our allies to safeguard the supply and do all that we can to ensure that we have the energy we need where we need it.
Suella Braverman.
Whilst the Ayatollah has been toppled, the IRGC remains intact, and the IRGC is indeed the head of the snake as the sponsor of global terrorism. Now, despite many urgings, the previous Conservative government failed to prescribe the IRGC. His government has made the promise to do so. Nothing has happened yet. If not now, then when?
Prime Minister.
Well, as she will know from her time in office, this is kept under review, but we have put extensive sanctions in, as the previous government did.
Alberto Costa.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Putting aside for a moment the rights and wrongs of the Prime Minister's decision on Saturday morning, can I ask the Prime Minister whether or not the BBC, which is in a unique position running BBC Persian language broadcasting into Iran, and given President Trump's wishes for the Iranian people themselves to take control, can the Prime Minister put on record if he will work with the BBC over the coming days to ensure that there's more government funding, wherever necessary, to broadcast what is required to the Iranian people?
Prime Minister.
Well, it's very important that the BBC reports and broadcasts in the way that it does, and we support them in doing that.
Josh Babarindi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. 23-year-old Eastbourne lad Cameron is currently lying stranded in a Dubai hospital bed after falling very ill during a minutes-long stopover in Dubai over the weekend. During this window, the airspace closed. Cameron's hospital bills are £1,000 a day, which he's being forced to pay up front despite having insurance. Cameron, who's watching, urgently needs to know, 1, when the Prime Minister will outline his repatriation plan, if there will be one. 2, when the Prime Minister will he prioritise British nationals who are clinically vulnerable for repatriation if it is medically safe. And third and finally, will the appropriate minister meet with me and with Cameron's family to ensure that he gets the treatment that he needs before money runs out, and to make sure that we can get Cameron back to Eastbourne safe?
Minister.
Cameron and his family and loved ones must be extremely worried. If he would pass me the full details of that particular case, I'll make sure that we do whatever we can to assist Cameron and his family.
Graham Stewart.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has made it clear that he thinks that there was insufficient imminent threat to justify our going with our allies in the initial strike. But after the act of war, after the attack on UK citizens across the Middle East, many countries of whom were not participating, and on British sovereign territory, that means that we can join in and we could be involved in offensive actions if the Prime Minister so chose. Why is he choosing not to, and why is he pretending it's for a legal reason when that legal reason has disappeared?
Prime Minister.
We started taking action on Saturday morning with our pilots in the sky across the region, and they've been working ever since. We added to that yesterday afternoon by acceding to the request of the Americans to use our bases for the attacks on the capability of Iran to launch the strikes in the first place.
Ayub Khan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Prime Minister for accepting that the reason the British Army is not involved is because it would be unlawful and illegal. Thereby, what America has done is illegal. An illegal attack which led to the death of 167 girls aged between 7 and 11. And there are people that are sat in this audience here today, Prime Minister, that oppose refugees coming into this country. The very people that are asking for war. Would the Prime Minister be surprised if we had a sudden influx of refugees because of what's happening?
Prime Minister.
The actions I've taken have focused on our need to protect our British nationals. I think it's in all of our interests, including our British nationals, that we do all we can to de-escalate the situation as quickly as possible.
Martin Wrigley.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I welcome the removal of the abhorrent Iranian regime, having seen the beginning of it 47 years ago when my father was a serving officer in the British Embassy and we knew the Americans taken hostage. So may I add my thanks to our current serving personnel who are putting their lives at risk. Given that we have, since the preemptive strike, now a sad but inevitable increasing escalation of hostilities, what can the Prime Minister do to persuade Donald Trump to go to negotiation, which is where we have to be, given that he believes in win-or-lose situations only?
Well, we're working with all of our allies and having discussions at every level with the US and others about how we resolve this situation and de-escalate. And ultimately, it will have to be a question of negotiation.
Jim Allister.
I do not underestimate for one moment the gravity of any government deciding to place its brave servicemen and women in harm's way. But in circumstances where our bases and our citizens are being targeted by the terror machine that is Iran, why are we still, as United Kingdom government, equivocating over whether we are actively on the side of those determined to liquidate the threat? Why the equivocation?
We're not. Pilots have been in the sky since Saturday morning, hours after the attack, risking their lives. I'm grateful for them for doing so. They went straight up there, and they've been up there ever since. No equivocation. They went up straight away, and it was the right thing to do.
Claire Young.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This conflict has grounded troubles at Doha, including a constituent who has 3 young children waiting at home. Following his conversation with Qatari leaders, can the Prime Minister explain how evacuations will be prioritised and what support on the ground is being provided to those who are simply expecting to pass through?
Prime Minister.
Yeah, can I reassure we're working with Qataris and others to ensure that we're able to get everybody to safety and security as quickly as possible. And they're evolving plans, as she will appreciate. It's a difficult situation, but I can assure her we're doing everything we can to get people out safely. They're our first priority.
Adnan Hussain.
As the Prime Minister admits, after the illegal preemptive strikes and the killing of Iran's leader, Iran has become more aggressive and more unpredictable in the region. So I ask, how can we possibly assure that further strikes, further attacks, further aggression will somehow calm the situation? Britain must not contribute to another conflict whose legality is in serious doubt. Will the Prime Minister now commit to upholding international law unequivocally and to publishing the government's legal advice and to pressing instead for an immediate ceasefire and for a return to diplomacy rather than risking and allowing the United Kingdom to be drawn into another unlawful war?
It's my duty to protect British nationals. We have 300,000 in the region, and you've heard the anxiety from various members about their constituents who are trapped in that situation, only too aware of the danger that they're facing. It's my duty to ensure that the risk to them is reduced. That's why we took the action we did over the weekend.
Chris Coughlin.
And Deputy Speaker, British Lance Corporal Brodie Gillen was killed by an Iranian ballistic missile in Iraq in 2020. When I arrived as a soldier 3 months later, our base came under attack from Iranian proxy militias 8 times. The Iranian regime has gunned down tens of thousands of protesters in recent weeks. Morality is complex. I entirely support the Prime Minister on his view of the need for a negotiated settlement, given sadly that the risks of regime change. But does the Prime Minister agree with me that any negotiated settlement needs to include protections against reprisals for protesters?
Prime Minister.
Very much so. Can I thank him for his service? It is really important that we approach this with clear principles about what we're trying to achieve and learning the lessons of history in terms of what happens after conflicts like this.
James McMurdoch.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And may I put on record, while I may not agree with all of the conclusions the Prime Minister has drawn, I am very grateful for the reverence and caution he shows to and the respect for the human life that he's been trying to demonstrate. The limited time he's had over the weekend to fully demonstrate and make decisions on how best to act has revealed that he was not involved in all of the pre-planning. So may I ask him, why is the UK no longer at the decision-making table?
Prime Minister.
Well, we talk to our allies all of the time, as he knows and would expect. And we talked to them extensively over the weekend in response to the situation as it developed.
Paul Kohler.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I applaud the Prime Minister's judgment in this matter. I'm in contact with British nationals trapped in a hotel in Qatar. They texted me a few minutes ago to say there has been a lack of messaging from our government to those of us who are seeing missiles passing overhead and more than 30 explosions just today. They're desperate for news on evacuation plans, but the consulate auto-reply is currently advising them on how best to enjoy Ramadan. Can the Prime Minister please ensure our consulates redouble their efforts to give information and reassurance to our nationals across the region?
We're doing everything we can as quickly as we can, and I'll pick up the issue that he's raised specifically, and can he please reassure his constituents that having raised it with me, I'll do whatever I can to respond very quickly.
Zara Sultana.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. US congressional staff were told on Sunday that Iran was not planning to strike American forces or bases unless Israel attacked Iran first. In other words, there was no intelligence indicating an imminent threat. Yet we have already seen preemptive strikes attacking a girls' school, killing over 100 children. This has been condemned by UNESCO as a grave violation of humanitarian law, yet the Prime Minister didn't bother to mention it. Continuing such actions is unlawful. Allowing them to take place from UK bases is unlawful. So I ask the Prime Minister, is the genocide of the Palestinian people not enough for this Labour government? Is he proud to be another Labour Prime Minister, obediently following Washington into yet another illegal war in the Middle East, making us all less safe? And finally, how much does he enjoy being Donald Trump's poodle?
Prime Minister.
I've set out the decisions I made over the weekend and the reasons for them. My first duty is to protect British nationals. It's the most important duty that I have, and I'll continue to discharge it.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. First of all, could I thank the Prime Minister for his statement. Ayatollah Khamenei and his regime have denied religious minorities freedom of religious belief for years. The Christians, the Sunnis, the Shias, the Baha'is. They killed 30,000 people in January 2026 who were protesting. Girls are abused and victimised regularly. Today the Ayatollah is deservedly dead and he burns in hell. And for one, I've put a shovel of coals on his head and hope his damnation will be a long one. Prime Minister, the IRGC and the Bajai paramilitary groups have the guns, the protesters have none. So what discussions has the Prime Minister had with the USA and Israel to destroy the murderous IRGC? And what discussion has the Minister had with Madam Rajavi and the national government, Iranian government in exile, and their 10-point plan for a solution for a transparent way forward?
Well, there are many discussions going on, as he will appreciate, and I do understand his level of concern, particularly in relation to religious freedom. So we are working with colleagues on those issues, and I'll update the House accordingly.
Danny Kruger.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I don't know what's more humiliating for the United Kingdom, the moral weakness of a government that can't distinguish between right and wrong and can't even take a sovereign decision without consulting international lawyers, or the material weakness of a country that has just decommissioned its last frigate in the Gulf and, as the Prime Minister has said in his statement, does not have the capability to defend our own citizens in the region. So given this position of neutrality and impotence, will the Prime Minister clarify what exactly he means by defensive versus offensive action? The whole operation is defensive according to the terms that the Prime Minister has set out. Or does he expect that the British will have some sort of operational veto on individual flights that the Americans take off from our bases?
Minister.
We're taking action in the sky through our pilots. We've authorised the US to use our bases in order to attack Iranians' ability to strike. But I'm not going to take lectures on morality from a party that stood a candidate who said that you can't be English unless you're white.
Can I thank the Prime Minister for his statement? Point of order, Ellie Chowns.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The honourable member for Wetherby and Easingwold incorrectly attacked the reputation of Mohsen Ali, Deputy Leader of the Green Party, by saying that he protested in support of the Ayatollah. He certainly did not. Mohsen Ali attended a CND Stop the War anti-war protest in support of his principles of being anti-war and pro-democracy and diplomacy. What advice can you give me about correcting the record regarding this serious false accusation?
Can I thank the honourable member for giving notice of her point of order? I assume she also informed the honourable member for Wetherby and Easingwold that she was going to refer to him. As she will know, members themselves are responsible for the accuracy of their words in the chamber. If correction is needed, I'm sure one will be forthcoming. For now, she has placed her own view on the record. Which brings us to presentation of Bill. Rebecca Smith.
Autonomous Maritime Vessels Regulation Bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 17th of April.
Friday the 17th of April. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Representation of the People Bill, second reading.
Now,
The reasoned amendment in the name of the official opposition has been selected. Minister to move second reading. Call the Secretary of State, Steve Reid.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be now read a second time. Now, there's a lot of interest across the House in this bill, and that is no surprise, because we are all proud of our British democracy. Our democracy is a fundamental part of who we are as a country. The long history of this House has been punctuated by reforms which have strengthened it. And it is precisely because of that evolution of our elections and Parliament that in a world where too many beacons of democracy have dimmed, ours still shines brightly. As parliamentarians, we are more than caretakers of democracy. We are here to actively advance it. We are also here to protect it from threats. When hostile actors at home and abroad seek to sow division, using every means possible to undermine our elections, trying to destabilise the very foundations of our freedom and our democratic institutions, then we must act. That is why we are debating the representation of the People Bill today, to secure our elections against those who threaten them, to protect those who participate, to ensure our democracy remains open and accessible to legitimate voters, and to strengthen and preserve our democracy for the next generation. At the 2024 general election, Labour's election manifesto committed to strengthening our democracy and upholding the integrity of elections. We campaigned on encouraging participation in our democracy, giving 16- and 17-year-olds the right to vote and improving voter registration, while fulfilling our pledge to strengthen protections against foreign interference, as well as rules around donations. We did that. I will give way. Yeah.
Rachel Taylor.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. I've come straight here from Kingsbury School in my constituency of North Warwickshire and Bedworth, where the Year 11 pupils